Is Canada doing better, and are we cutting rates again in December? Hi everyone, Yinan here. Today let's take a look at the macroeconomic data to see what's going on in the unemployment rate, inflation, and how does that translate into our likelihood of December rate cuts in Canada. So on the screen you'll see that this is the current unemployment rate data in October 25. And we can see that unemployment rate for Canada as a whole has dropped from 7.1% to 6.9% in October. Okay, so that's quite a big drop, right, in unemployment rate, and that usually supports the economy looking better, and therefore maybe we can cut rates again. But obviously it's not that simple. Let's keep looking. So why did the unemployment rate drop? Because we created actually a lot more new jobs as well. In October, there's 67,000 jobs created, which is kind of one of the bigger months of job creation in 25. And if we look at the actual specific location for where these jobs are created, actually a lot of them are in Ontario. So out of the 67,000, 55,000 of these new jobs were created in Ontario, which is quite interesting and important to know, right? Because we know Ontario is the most important economic center in Canada, and if we're creating jobs, good, that's a good sign. And unemployment rate in Ontario, as a result, fell 0.3% to 7.6% in October. Canada as a whole, it's 6.9%. Ontario has always been on the higher end, and Toronto in specific is probably like the highest location, right? And we know Toronto is like the center of Ontario and has an even higher rate than Ontario in general, probably like somewhere in the 8.9% range. So it's good. Like from this alone, we're looking at unemployment rate getting better, we're getting more jobs. But is that actually true? So when we take a look at the jobs by different sectors, okay, you can see these are the sectors that created new jobs, like wholesale and retail trade, transportation and warehousing, storage, and information, culture, and recreation, right? So, and manufacturing. So these are the sectors that created the most amount of these new jobs. And the sectors that lost the most jobs are construction, healthcare, right? Educational services, especially construction. You can see this number one here means statistically significant. If we compare construction jobs, which we know because builders are not building stuff, right? Like where real estate market is dead, you know, builders are not building, so therefore construction is slow. And but if we compare the actual salary of a construction job versus like a wholesale, retail trade, you know, warehousing, we can see that these three sectors, especially the top two, are mostly driven by not high-paying jobs, right? They're the lower-paying jobs, and they tend to be more part-time workers. The actual data actually shows the 67,000 new jobs we saw in the last slide. We saw all these 67,000 new jobs. 85,000, like more than the 67,000, it's all part-time jobs, okay? It's actually part-time jobs that increased, okay, because of these sectors. And full-time jobs, okay, like construction is likely a full-time job. I've rarely heard of like part-time construction workers, right? They actually fell by 19,000. Okay, so it's not good. The jobs that we're gaining are low-paying part-time jobs, and we're losing high-paying full-time jobs. So on its own, the overall data may look good, but the specifics is not as favorable. And we know tariff is the biggest factor that's affecting our jobs. And we can see that from January to October this year in 25, employment in good producing industries, like industries actually producing stuff, okay, including manufacturing and construction. This is all included. This is only 1 month data. If we look at the whole year for 10 months, we actually lost net 54,000 jobs comparing the beginning of the year, and now we lost a lot of these good producing jobs, right? Especially including like lumber, for example, which is the most impacted by the US tariffs. In addition to lumber, we have steel, aluminum, auto sector, energy products. All of these kind of the backbone of Canadian economy jobs sectors are very much affected by the tariff. So we're jobs-wise, we're not doing great despite what the headline is saying. And another interesting factor is that if we separate the jobs gained by big and small firms, we all know that small business is the backbone of the Canadian economy, but Canada also has a lot of large firms like the banks and the big manufacturers, right? So there's two sides of like employers, right? And middle sector is actually quite smaller in Canada. It's like either really big or really small business that dominates our economy. And we can see that if we separate the firms by 500 plus employees, it's the big firms, and firms less than 500 employees, which is the smaller, medium firms, the job gains, like the employment increase, are mostly in the big companies, okay? And these are companies that have probably like international ties, they have diversification in like international business in multiple countries, they have resources, probably multiple suppliers from different countries to diversify the risk from the US alone, right? And the firms with smaller firms with less employees, they're actually like losing jobs. So that means like local businesses in Canada are actually losing. It's just the big companies that are driving all these jobs, and they're part-time jobs. So big companies hiring more part-time people, probably paying them less, not only on wages, but on benefits and vacations. They're just probably even hiring contractors instead of full-time employees by the big companies, right? And the smaller, medium companies in Canada are losing their employees. So not good. So despite what the headline says, not a good situation. Now, if we look at the inflation data, Canada inflation rate actually dropped from 2.4% to 2.2% in October. Okay, and the core inflation, CPI median, actually dropped from 3.1 to 2.9. Okay, good. The inflation data headline also looks great. Does that mean we're gonna cut rates in December? If we look at the actual 12-month change for CPI, this is the 2.2%, and CPI excluding gasoline, we can see that this drop is really just gasoline, okay, like gas price drop. And in the winter, usually gas is cheaper because we enter a winter mix, right, winter pricing. So it's just seasonality, like it's nothing. But the excluding gasoline, our inflation is actually still quite high, right? It's not dropping. In fact, it's actually probably the higher end of this year. And if we look at food from grocery stores, right, you can see that food is actually still much higher than the headline inflation, even though this month it also improved a little bit, but it's still very much higher, right? Around the 3.8, probably like 4% range. So food is still expensive. And if we compare food in the last 6 years, ever since COVID started, okay? Coffee, the price has gone up 77%. Beef, gone up by 59%. Eggs, up 41%. And rent, our just, most important living cost is rent, is up 32%. So Canadians, our standard of life is much worse than 5-6 years ago. Even though inflation looks good, but the price is already sky high, right? So that's why we feel like most of our financial situation has worsened in the last 5-6 years. And if we think, okay, well, mortgage rate is at least down, so should we be happy about mortgage rates down? Homeowners it's actually not benefiting from the recent rate cuts as much as you think. Mortgage interest actually rose 2.9% year over year, making it one of the more persistent drivers of inflation. Why are we cutting rates but our mortgage interest actually we're still paying more? Doesn't make sense, right? If you look at the 5-year government bond, last time when we cut rates was October 29th. Before we cut rates, we were actually around less than 2.6, like 2.5 something percent for the 5-year bond yield. Now we're at 2.72%. At some point we're even approaching 2.8%. So why is our bond yield going up? And we know bond yield affects our fixed mortgage rates, right? If you're applying for fixed mortgage rates, they go by bond yield, they don't go with prime rate. What we're dropping is we're dropping prime rate, but fixed rates are actually not dropping. So why is it that? Because we actually have a medium-term inflation expectation going higher. Because we're dropping rates, we actually expect the future inflation rates to be higher with all the tariff going on and all that. Bond yield actually reflects inflation expectation. So yeah, mortgage interest, we're paying more this year than last year. Do we think we're going to drop rates again? This is where Canada is 2.25%. US is at 4%. So personally, I feel like US may keep dropping one more time, okay, in December. In fact, if we look at the financial market prediction for December 10th, there's almost 70% chance US is going to cut rates again, right? US is going to cut by 0.25%. And like I mentioned, that it makes sense for the US to keep cutting because they're so much higher than us and they have room. And according to our Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem last time, he said, after we cut to 2.25, it's done cutting rates for now. We're done. Okay, and no further cuts being considered for now. So if he cuts rates in December, basically he'll be slapping his own face, right? So I don't think we're gonna be cutting rates in Canada in December. And for those of you who are counting on cutting rates to help with the real estate market, hopefully that the Bank of Canada sees that, hey, our Canadian real estate market needs saving. We need a lower interest rate to boost the activity. You can see from this, like they see that it doesn't help, right? Cutting rates will only help existing homeowners to feel better about their monthly payments, but it's actually increasing future inflation expectation, making bond yields higher and making fixed rate mortgages even higher. So it doesn't really solve the problem of getting new buyers to enter the market, right? So they see that, so there's even less incentive to cut rates. Plus the headline unemployment rate looks good, like everything good, why cut rates? You know, we don't have to cut rates. So that's likely what I think is going to happen. And in reality, we know that we're struggling, right? Canadians, like from this graph, you can see that Canadian HELOC debt climbs back to 2010-20 levels. We can see people are like, we're dipping into our HELOC, right? Our kind of, you know, emergency savings, and HELOCs is going up at the fastest rate in the past, 10 years. And for me, if I tap into my HELOCs, something is majorly wrong with my financial situation, right? Like it's really, HELOCs are usually people's last line of reserve. Like they tap into their TFSA, their savings, before they tap into the HELOCs. So when we're all using our HELOCs a lot more, that means people are indeed struggling. But people from the top, right, the Bank of Canada, they look at different indicators telling them different things than how bad we're struggling at the bottom, and that's always going to be the case. So that's my personal thought on the macroeconomics in Canada and my guess on what's going to happen in December. And keep in mind, all of these are guesses. Make sure you do your own analysis, understand your own risk, keep your leverage low, and keep safety is most important in 2026. Okay, if you like this content, give it a like, subscribe, and until next time. Ciao.